I was very honored to be asked to speak here. I have no idea why you came. I thought on the way over here it might be that there would be a full house because it's kind of hot and it's air conditioned. And then I saw the food and I said, well, there's another reason that people will be here. So for those of you who came for some other reason, thank you very much for coming. And thank you for that extravagant introduction. I appreciate it. In January 1964, I received a phone call from somebody I didn't know, never heard of, named Edward Steinhaus. And Edward Steinhaus called to ask if I would be interested in being considered as the founding chair of a department that he named psychobiology here at UC Irvine. Now, at that time, I was very happily ensconced as a professor at the University of Oregon, had just built a brand new, beautiful home, and my children were all in school and everybody was happy. And so why would I even respond to the telephone call? But I did. And I decided to come here and meet Edward Steinhaus and learn what he had in mind. But that's not really why I came. I had been in California before for a long time, and I knew that in the late 1950s, the governor of the California and the regents of the University of California decided it was time to take a close look at the future of higher education in California, set up a study group, and the study group decided that it was important to build 3 brand new universities that would be expected to become other Berkeleys and other UCLAs. They did that because they thought it was time to invest in higher education in the state of California. Now, other states at that very period of time were converting existing colleges into university. Arizona State University, for example, was Arizona State College, and before that, it was Arizona State Teachers College. Santa Barbara was Santa Barbara State College before it became the University of California. And UCLA initially was a southern branch of San Jose State Teachers College. That's how UCLA got started, a southern branch of San Jose State Teachers College, and it morphed eventually into UCLA. So what they did essentially was to upgrade institutions. They would upgrade them, rename them. But the wisdom of the governor and the regents was that it was time to develop de novo new universities as an investment. Now, this is the theme of what I'm going to be talking about today, is higher education as an investment, not a cost, as an investment. Why is it an investment? Because we need an educated population to make decisions, to make the economy grow, and that's very important. And it's not a cost to do that, it's an investment because the payoff will be seen at a later time. And that's what they did. Very far thinking on the part of the leaders, the academic leaders and the government at that time. So I thought that it would be a good idea to take a look at the opportunity here, because the plan of this group was that we would be one of the world's greatest universities. After all, at that time, Berkeley was the #1 public university in the world and arguably equal to the best university in the United States. So why wouldn't I want to join that? So I left this wonderful job I had at the University of Oregon, where I had never even served on a committee. All they wanted me to do was to do research and teach whatever I wanted to teach. I mean, I had the dream job up there. So I came down here, and I was met by Edward Steinhaus. I flew in by helicopter. You probably don't know this, but at the Marriott down, I think it's a Marriott, down on the corner of PCH and Jamboree, where there are tennis courts, that was a heliport. And because there weren't any roads to get to Los Angeles at that time, you had to go up through Seal Beach on Highway 1. There was no There was no 405, there was no 5, there was no 10, there was no 73, none of that. So rather than take a 3-hour drive up the coast, and one would take a helicopter. So he met me there, and he drove me over to the corner of Bison and MacArthur, which was appropriately named. You know why it was called Bison? Because there were bison. And that's pretty simple, isn't it? There were bison there. That was a bison ranch. And we stood there and looked over in this general area, and he said, now that's where the university is going to be. And I looked over there. I discovered weeks later I was even looking in the wrong direction. There was nothing to look at. There was nothing to look at. So we got a little closer, and we drove up and came to what is now the corner of University in California. And we got out and opened a ranch gate, which is barbed wire fence, opened a barbed wire fence, and drove up a rutted road that the grass cleaned up the bottom of the car as we went up to a point. And I could see that there were buildings that looked like they were maybe 4 to 6 feet out of the ground. And that was my first close view of what it looked like. I listened to him talk. This person, Edward Steinhaus, was a visionary. He decided that it was time to change the entire structure of biological sciences. Biological sciences at that time was organized around whether things are plants or animals, big animals or small animals, big plants, small plants, departments of that kind. And he said, no, it's time to change all of that. It has to be organized around levels of analysis. And so you start with molecular biology and biochemistry, and you go to developmental biology, and all the way up to population biology with what he called psychobiology in the middle, and he called it psychobiology, invented the term because he wanted every department to have a last name of biology. We've changed it to neurobiology and behavior because that's a more modern thing in recent years. So this was truly visionary, and it is now the case that almost every university in the world is organized in that way, and before that it was not. So this campus right here, Edward Steinhaus, changed the organization of the research and teaching of biological sciences. It started here, and you can see his name on the building, Steinhaus Hall, over in the Biological Sciences Plaza. So I came here because I wanted to be part of what was going to be one of the greatest universities in the world, supported by a very forward-looking state and regents who saw clearly that education is an investment, not a cost. Very, very critical idea. I don't know how many of you think about it at the moment, but it's an investment with huge payoff, not just to the individual, but to society. And that's what it's about. And I wanted to be part of that. So I moved here and became founding chair and did all of those other things that were mentioned in the introduction. I may get back to some of those. Now, how did I get here? So I was told that people who give this talk say something about their backgrounds. I didn't just wake up one day and find myself at the University of Oregon. There is a history, and I'll give you a little bit of the history. I grew up in southern Arizona, Nogales, Arizona. Have any of you ever been to Nogales? It's on the border, about 70 miles south of Tucson. And my father was a Protestant minister. Both of my parents were college educated, and the house was just full of books. And for the first 9 years of my life, we lived in whatever luxury you can have if you live in a parsonage, and if you're forced to go to church every Sunday, which was not my favorite thing to do. So life was decent. We moved to Southern California, to Riverside, and then my father died. Actually, he committed suicide. So I lost my father, and we went into poverty when I was 9 years old. Now, don't feel sorry for me, because I learned something which is a very, very important message. I learned when I was 9 years old that if there's something that I need, if there's something that I want to do, there is one person who is responsible for that, and that's me. And that was the best lesson that I could have learned, and I still believe it, and I appreciate everything that happened. So let me give you just a couple of examples. Some of them are funny. I actually, when I was very young, shined shoes on the street. I actually sold newspapers on the street. And I had my best day when I was just short of 10 years old. My very best day, I sold 100 newspapers. It was my first dollar. I got a penny for each one. And I thought we should have an event like this every year to do it. Very important event. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. So the Pearl Harbor attack was big news. Newspapers sold, and I made $1. I also made a lot of money because I had newspaper routes, and I saw that between Riverside and Corona, some of you have driven on the 55, off on the side they had camps where soldiers who were going to the Pacific War sat for the few weeks before they were sent off on ships. So this was their last station, and they were closed in. They couldn't get out at all. So I figured out that these folks needed things. So I would sneak into the camp, and I would sell them candy, and I would sell them needles and thread and all kinds of things like that at a markup. At a markup. And I actually made quite a bit of money for, at that time, say a 9 and 10-year-old kid taking care. And I said it really was welfare. I was doing a service. That's how I justified it. And I went to high school. And throughout all of my schooling, I worked after school. I always had a job. I had some difficult jobs, some good jobs. I worked in a machine shop for a long period of time, and actually in the machine shop. After hours, I modified my bicycle. I bought a small gasoline motor, tore out the bottom part of the bicycle, put the motor in there, and made myself a motorized bicycle that would go about 45 miles an hour. And that was my transportation. Little things like that, you know. If you want to get around in life, you have to do it yourself. So if I want to go fast, I had to, and I became a mechanic. I found a car abandoned in an orange grove, and I bought it for $40. It had a big sign on the front of it that said Bonnie Blue Eyes. So I drove this Bonnie Blue Eyes after I got tires for it, repaired the engine, and I learned how to take out transmissions and rear ends and all of that. I mean, you had to do that in those days, and I did it. And my point I'm making is I never regretted it. I'm not giving you a sad story. I'm giving you a happy story. It was a good thing. I learned how to do all of these things. So I'll back up a little bit. When I was 7 years old, I had a terrible illness. I had brucellosis, or what's called undulant fever. It's a disease you don't see very much, but every bison in Yellowstone has this illness. And it is, can be transmitted by milk. I don't know exactly how I got it, but I was bedridden. And I was told that I would have brucellosis the rest of my life. And so I was introduced to people who had brucellosis, who were invalids, because I said, you have to get used, that's what you're gonna happen. Now, to make a long story short, it only lasted a year because the first miracle drug came along, which is sulfanilamide. That was before the other miracle drugs that came. And I was treated with it. I was in an experimental group that came through southern Arizona, and I got the drug. I was not in the control group, fortunately, and 2 weeks later I was back in school. But during that year, I didn't have anything to do. There was no television in those days, so I read. And I studied spelling, and I studied arithmetic, and all of these things. All by myself for a year. And so when I went back to school after I was well the next year, I was way ahead of the class. and I was way ahead of the class for about 4 years, less and less as the years went on because I was basically lazy. But I, in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, I was the best person in class. Or well, I had an opponent. There was another guy in the class that I was in competition with, and sometimes he would beat me, and it always bothered me. I wonder where he is right now. Well, I was a really very good student, but once again, I owed that to a considerable degree to brucellosis. That is, if I hadn't have had that disease, I wouldn't have gotten so far ahead in reading and spelling and arithmetic and so on, because that's all I had to do when I was ill for that year. So, when I was in the 5th grade, a man came through class and had a bunch of musical instruments. And I decided that I was going to play the clarinet. I'd never seen one before, but it looked like a reasonable thing to do. So I rented one, and I joined the high school band. And to make a long story short, I played it all the way through junior high school, through college, through graduate school. And even today, I play in a concert band, a swing band, and a jazz band. Last night I had a 4-hour rehearsal, 2 hours of concert band and 2 hours of swing band. And on Sunday, I'll be playing with a jazz group up in the park in the University Hills. And a week ago, a jazz group I played with played for the 50th anniversary in the School of Physical Sciences. So something I started in the 5th grade has lingered on and is something that I keep as a very important hobby. In high school, I developed a strong, and in junior high, I developed a strong interest in drama and music. And I maintained that in high school. I played in the band, I played in the orchestra, I played in the opera orchestra in the city. I played in the All Southern California High School Band. I was not only an actor in the drama, but also I was a director. I got to direct the big play at the senior play when I was a senior in high school. So when I was thinking about what to do after I graduated, I had no pressure to go to college because we had no money in the family. So I just decided what I was going to do. I was going to go to college and maybe major in music or drama, and I'll go. So I got on a bus, and I went to San Jose State College, then it was called, and I enrolled. And there was no tuition, and I enrolled. And I enrolled as a drama major, but I also joined the chorus and I joined the band and all of that. But then something happened. See, I had this background in music and drama, but I went to a college that required me to take a lot of other stuff. And I had to take literature, and I had to take genetics, and I had to take anthropology, and I had to take lots of stuff. And I found out what college was really like. It was not training you to do something that you thought you might like to do, but rather is to open the vista, a cornucopia, to let me know what was possible in the world. And I wanted to major in everything. Every time I took a class, it was better than the last class. And then I finally took a class from a very, very boring teacher on a very, very interesting topic. And that was what we then called physiological psychology, brain and behavior. And it was really, the lecture was very boring. Very nice man, but very boring. But the content was what made it exciting. And by the time I was a junior, I decided I was going to be a professor. That's what I was going to do. I was going to do so well that I'd be able to get in graduate school and I'd become a professor. I didn't know really what a professor did, by the way, but stood up there and taught us, and the stuff was really very interesting. So I did well in college. You've already heard that. I studied hard. Despite the fact, and this is very important, I worked my way through college. I had no money. All the money I had was whatever I earned. But I could do it because there was no tuition. There was no tuition. If there'd been $10 tuition, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So what did I do? Well, I got a job stacking bottles for a Coca-Cola company. They went out, distributed, came back with empty bottles. I would load up new ones for the next day. I worked in a bakery. I had to go to work at 2 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock. I worked in a chicken ranch for a year, cutting chickens' heads off Saturday morning. And my best job, I got a job as a psychiatric technician in a mental hospital, and I worked from 12 midnight to 8 in the morning. And that was, I don't know when I slept. I think about that from time to time. When did I sleep? And I don't remember. But it was good because I had, of the 8 hours at the psychiatric hospital, I could study for at least 4. And so I used that for study time. And so I worked 8 hours a day and went to college. You couldn't do that today. You couldn't do that today. My point is, I would not be standing here if the state of California had not said a long time ago that education is an investment, not a cost. I wouldn't be here, and neither would, I would guess, at least a third of the faculty that you know on this campus, maybe more. That's just a rough guess.
Well, I went to UCLA free.
Yeah.
Like you.
Well, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get exactly.
And I keep saying I paid the state of California a gazillion fold.
That's exactly my next point. So in 1964, I've given you my background. Oh, I skipped it. I'll just finish it up. I went to Berkeley. I loved it for graduate school. I started the research that I now work on, continue to work on. I started it when I was a graduate student in Berkeley. I was subsequently awarded a fellowship to study with a Nobel Prize winner in Rome, Italy. His name was Daniel Beauvais, and I went to Rome to study. And I learned that Daniel Beauvais received the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the drug that cured my disease when I was in the 2nd grade. Daniel Beauvais won the Nobel Prize for that. He also discovered antihistamines, in case you've ever taken an antihistamine. He developed a drug which when modified, became Thorazine, which is the first drug, antipsychotic drug, and so on. I worked with him. That was a big thing for me. Now, when I came to UCI, there was no tuition. I came in 1964. In 1968, Ronald Reagan became governor. And I know we revere, respect, and frequently call out the name of the great Ronald Reagan, who did so many wonderful things for us. One of the wonderful things he did for us was to say immediately, we must impose tuition in the university. And he worked very hard to try to impose tuition in the university, partly because he was angry at the students. There was a student revolt. You may know about a history of a revolt starting in Berkeley. Students got very agitated. Actually, it was started by right-wing Goldwater supporters, but it built into a big conflagration, and it really annoyed Ronald Reagan, so he wanted to punish the students, and he wanted to put in a tuition. Well, the Regents wouldn't go along with it, but Ronald Reagan put in fees. He put in fees, right? Everybody knew that that was another word for tuition. And once you put in a fee, then whenever there's a problem in supporting the university, the governor and the regents can turn and say, well, you can solve the problem. You need more money? Raise it, right? In place of looking at the university as an investment, it turns it on its head and say, now the university is a cost. Oh, it's a burden to the state. Look at the cost of the state. I mean, for heaven's sake, and all those students are benefiting from this. They should share in it, so let's put in a fee. And then the fee became a tuition, and it went from $400 to $1,500 to $4,400 to whatever it is at the present time. But the underlying assumption of this is that it's not a benefit to the state, it's just a benefit to the student, so let them find a way to do it. It's just topsy-turvy. It just turns it on its head. When I was executive vice chancellor here in 1974 to 1982, the state of California provided approximately 34% of the money to run the university. Now, it actually, in terms of for the educational part of it, it's even more than that, because the university runs housing, it does lots of things that the state shouldn't pay. So it was largely paying for the operation of the university, 34%. Guess, don't say it out loud, but think for a moment, what do you think it is right now? Think of a number. If you think 9%, you're correct. That's what it does. Of all of the things that we do here, 9% of the costs are provided by the state. It was about double that just 3 or 4 years ago. Then we had a recession, and that gave further opportunity for the state to cut the money of the university, and it hasn't come back. And there's no plan for it to come back. It's now locked in at a lower level, which is about 9%. With any luck, it could go up to 10%. So that's what's on my mind. What is it that I think about? What is it that bothers me? Is this topsy-turvy view. When you look at what higher education has done just for my life, what matters to me. You asked me to talk about what matters to me, so I'm telling you. And you now look what is happening to you if you're a student. It would be impossible for you to work your way through college today because you couldn't make enough money to pay for what you need. It's out of the question. Out of the question. It's up to you. I mean, after all, it's your life. You have to pay for it. You're not a benefit for society. Now, think about the unintended consequences of this. I told you when I went to college, I thought I was a drama and music major, sort of, just because I was interested in that. But I could do anything. I could choose to do anything. And I didn't have to think about how much money am I going to make afterwards. That never entered my mind. I just thought, well, I'll get a job doing something. Well, throughout the United States, the average debt for going to college for all students is $20,000 when they finish. That's just the average debt. My guess it's probably higher here. So that means that when you first graduate, you've got to get a job and then start paying off a debt when you have a low income to begin with. And then from a point of view of economics, you're a drag on the economy because the amount of money that you make as a salary, you should go out and buy things. And if you buy things, you pay taxes, and that's the way it works, you see. You get a salary, you buy things, you pay taxes, and the state gets it, and the state can do things. Now the state says, I won't pay for your education, therefore you have to borrow money, then you have to pay that back, and you're not buying that car, you're not buying that house because of the debt service that you have. Everything has gotten backwards in the past 20 years or so because of that. So what matters to me very, very deeply, aside from my research, if we have time you can ask me questions about that, but what matters for me is that through the actions of imposing tuition and the inactions of correcting that situation, we have created a very difficult situation in the United States for higher education. We have made it a cost. We have come to believe as a society that it is a cost. We have lost sight of the very important view that education at all levels is represented as an investment, not a cost. Now let's back away for a moment. Has anybody decided that high school students should pay tuition to go to high school? Public high school? No. Has anybody said that kids in grade school should pay a tuition to go to grade school? No. Why then? What is the rationale for the arbitrary decision that if you start this other level, all of a sudden you have to pay for it? I don't understand that. It is completely irrational and it's uneconomic. Even if you don't have a bleeding heart for higher education and just think of economic principles alone, you'd say the best thing we can do is to invest in students so that they will achieve, make lots of money, pay high taxes, and make the economy grow. Even if you didn't give a damn about the university. From a pure raw economic perspective, you'd say make it an investment. But the very people who should have that view are the ones who are saying, no, charge the students. I mean, after all, it's to their benefit, so let's make those costs go directly to the students as best get. I'm getting a signal over here. See, I was just getting wrapped up. You see. Actually, this is a good time for me to say that I have appreciated the invitation to come here, and I've appreciated the opportunity to talk about something that usually I never talk about. That is, this is not something that I've never talked about this before. This is just something that lives in my head and boils around from time to time. As you can see, I am very enthusiastic about these issues, and I hope that some of you in here will be motivated to do something about it. That is, we need to make a change in our culture, we need to make a change in our state, and we need to get people to rethink what it is the higher education is all about and why it's such a benefit to society, not just a benefit to the individual. So thank you, and I'll take questions.